Hello and welcome to another special episode of Talking Loyal, and tonight we are joined by former footballer Dave Kitson. Welcome, Dave.
How are we doing? All right?
All good. How you doing? Thanks for coming on again.
No worries. No worries.
I think you've been coaching tonight. Is that right, Dave? You've been.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've been coaching under a great bunch of girls actually under 12s team in Woodley and Reading here, and it's good. It's freezing. It's absolutely
very cold. Yeah.
But no, they made it a really fun session. So yeah, it was all part of the academy that we move around here in Reading, and try and coach as many kids and anybody really. Anybody who wants to coach it.
Yeah,
but
nice.
Especially kids teams, it's great.
Cool. Yeah, we'll probably discuss your coaching a bit later on if that's all right. But with most of our guests, we sort of start off with a few quick fire questions just to ease everyone in and make it nice and jovial like it should be. So if you don't mind, who do you support growing up? Do you still support a side now?
Yeah. No, I'm a Spurs fan. So my
okay.
mum and dad were born in Tottenham.
Okay.
And so I've been going to Spurs ever since. I think my first game was about 6, and
right.
saw Glenn Hoddle play, who remains my hero to this day.
Yeah, that was a sort of follow-up. But did you, as a kid, was there a favourite player, or like you said, obviously Hoddle?
Yeah, Hoddle and Waddle, Gascoigne, obviously a little bit later.
Yeah,
it's just an absolute genius. And I actually remember standing and asking my dad why the guy in the number 10 shirt, which was Hoddle, was so much better than everybody else. And I remember my dad just looking at me, and I remember, you know, when you're a little kid as well, and you're all looking up at all the adults, and they all sort of just turned around and started chuckling at me. Yeah. It was a question for a kid, and asking my dad just turned around and went, "Because that's Glenn Hoddle," and it just stuck with me. And I've still never met him, but he did say, I think he was doing Match of the Day or something once, and he did say something complimentary, and the fact that he even mentioned my name was like
amazing.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. No, I'm a Spurs fan myself. Tate's Arsenal, but I've been like my daddy, like your dad. Sorry, my dad was born in Tottenham, and we've been going ever since we were little boys. So
yeah, it's amazing. And looking at the club now and what it's become, and it's I just remember, from where we were. And I was at the last game as well at White Hart Lane when the rainbow came out, and we won. It's just unbelievable. And now when you go down there and you look at it, and all the time when I was hearing these Levy out shouts, people just do not know what you're going. You just have not got a clue.
Yeah. You still go now? Then you regularly get to games and.
Oh yeah, and I'll go down there where I can. Obviously, with the coaching now, weekends are getting a bit busy, and but I'll try and go down there, and I'll try and go to. There's just not enough. Do you know? People say there's too much football on telly, and there aren't enough days free for me to get to all the football games I want to get to. So yeah.
Well, Dave, you're well known as a professional footballer, but what was your first job before football?
My first job was working for Sainsbury's, that was like one of the big companies in Letchworth at the time, where I grew up. And just if you sort of got to sort of 16 years old, you went and tried to get a job there for a bit of pocket money. So we all did. A lot of my mates went down there, and then you end up meeting people, like anywhere really, like an office or wherever, and you end up meeting people. And my two best mates I met there, and it's still my best mates to this day. So it's a big old part of my life, and it was always something that you could draw upon to kind of keep you grounded, really.
Nice. Yeah, I worked at Tesco's back in the day. What department were you in? Were you fruit and veg, or shelves, or on the checkout?
Well, no. I always refused to do the checkouts. It's just like I was difficult even back then. So I ended up. Actually, I started on the frozen food section. Then they moved me to BWS, which was beers, wines, and spirits. In fact, I can still remember it was very good. And then they decided that actually, Dave, we don't really think you're a people person. We'll move you to the warehouse out the back, where you can be out the way. So so I ended up there.
Nice. Well, moving on from your job at Sainsbury's and stuff, what was the best player you eventually played or played against, trained with?
Best player I played against was a tie. I think it's a tie. Was Paul Scholes and Luka Modric. Those two.
It's not a bad two, is it at all? Really?
Yeah, I just Paul Scholes was the first player. The way I came up through the leagues from pub football to non-league football to League Two and then the Championship, and then I missed out on League One going up, and then the Premier League. I was always ready for it. I was always ready for the step, and I was still sort of ready for the Premier League. But then I realised that there was this little top bit of the Premier League, and Paul Scholes was the first player who made me realise that. Actually, there's a level that I'm never going to get to.
Yeah, probably you're never prepared for that, I suppose, when you play someone or people like that. It's incredible.
Yeah, you just don't realise. And I never came through an academy, so I didn't really have a handle on just how good players could be. And I saw him, and I just thought, oh my god, this is no matter how many hours I train for this, I'm never going to catch this guy. Bit of a morale crusher, actually. With Modric, I remember watching Modric. It might even have been his debut for Spurs. We played against them, and I remember coming off the pitch and calling Brian McDermott, who I think might even have been the Reading manager, or he was scouting for Arsenal. It was one of those, and I just said, mate, this Spurs have got a lad here, Luka Modric, and I said, and he's just destroyed us. I said he's one of the best footballers I've ever seen in my life. And then obviously later on he became the Luke, became Modric, So at the time it was just some guy that Spurs had signed, but much about him. But then he became Luka Modric, and no two players have ever sort of punched me in the stomach really like those two, and just made me think, oh wow, there's levels above.
You mentioned the cold weather earlier. Is there a game or a stadium that you can remember back in your playing career that was the coldest ever match that you've been playing in?
Well, I played at Stoke for 2 years, and that's
Britannia.
It's always windy. I was never fussed about it, I was never too bothered about the cold. It's the wind ruins football. Nothing else ruins football element wise other than the wind. I do remember playing at the Vetch, which was Swansea's original ground.
Right.
And probably about this time of year, the sun was low in the sky, and it hadn't quite peered over one of the longest stands. And so if you take the pitch long ways on, about a strip of it down the left-hand side, as I recall, was still frozen solid. And the game was basically played on 2/3 of the pitch. And every time it went onto the frozen part, you'd kind of tiptoe to go and get the ball and get it back onto. It was just ridiculous. And it culminated with a Finnish winger, who I still remember the name of, Tero Pilvi, running on there with one of Swansea's defenders, slipping and getting a boot in the face and smashing his cheekbone. And I just remember looking at his face and it being sort of concave. Funnily enough, I never saw him again after that. I'm not sure whatever happened to him.
Very good. Obviously with football itself is heavily linked to initiation songs and music and whatever. But did you have a particular song, or if you were obviously the darts had just been, would there be an entrance song for yourself that you'd like?
No, I full disclosure, for a large part of my career, I had a huge sense of humour failure, and I would leave it to others. And I was thinking about this earlier because I've just taken on James Harper into our academy, who was a teammate of mine at Reading, and I always just felt, that leave the humour to him, and I need to. In order to be my best, I need to sort of give it some serious focus. So if I were doing this during my career 20 years ago, and a journalist had asked me, what sort of, they would have got a very, very blunt.
Yeah, straight down the line. No, it's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. That's fine.
But no, because it got out of hand. The initiations got out of hand, and people started taking it to the nth degree and seeing what they could get away with. And there were some horror stories that came out, especially about the academy players and the team players. I was never a big one. I was never ever a big one for it. If someone else wanted to get up and sing, that's fine.
Yeah.
Not a problem. But I was just, I sort of cultivated this kind of serious persona, and people knew, that's where Kits likes to be, and we'll leave him there. It didn't mean I didn't enjoy other people doing it. But if you go out on a night out, so we'd go to the local restaurant where we'd have a curry, perhaps as a team, and one of the lads would go, "Oh, come on, I'm gonna order the hottest thing in the house. You all have to put a tenner in, and I'll eat the hottest curry that there is." They'd be collecting tenors, and it's not the money. It's not it's the principle of, I don't give a shit if you do it.
Yeah, no,
You want to eat
everyone, is it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not paying you to bloody thing. If you want to do it. So I was very much like that, and but I needed to be like that to kind of to be at my best. And I always felt if I let my guard down a little bit, I'd lose a bit of my just something, a bit of my sharpness, a bit of my guile, a bit of I'd lose something from my game if I wasn't taking it seriously.
No, it's fair enough.
Perfect. This last question, we like to do a little trivia question on all our podcasts, and this one's no different. And Dave, you scored 3 hat-tricks for Reading, but which one of them did you score in the fastest time? Have a little think about it, and we'll revert back to it at the end of the show. That's what we normally do. So.
I can't remember the 3.
Well, I can give you the 3 names.
We might give you some.
I'll give you the 3 names at the end, and then we'll see if you can grab them.
Okay, all right.
Jack, we'll move into your professional career.
If we don't mind, we'll sort of move into your professional, your football career as such, and how you got into the professional game. Like you said, you started off in Sainsbury's, but was it you? Like you said, you were living in the Hitchin, Letchworth area, so you started in the sort of non-league days, moving to Cambridge. You're quite a late comer, weren't you, to the professional game?
Yeah, I didn't sign a professional contract until I was 21. I didn't come through an academy, so I was working in Sainsbury's. I was playing part-time for Hitchin, who were probably step 4 at the time, as it was then. Playing for the youth team, getting a couple of games in the first team. And then the groundsman scorched all the grass off the pitch. and our youth team got disbanded because of that, which was a shame because there were some tremendously talented players in that team. I don't know what happened to them, or just fell by the wayside, presumably. And then I was working at Sainsbury's, and there were some trials going on at a club called Olsey Town in Bedfordshire, and just over the back of the fields from where I lived in Letchworth on the Hearts-Beds border. My 2 friends there, Liam, Paul Devereux, who are my best mates to this day, said, you should come down. We've seen you play pub football, and pub football was great at the time. We were playing for the Arena Tavern. Man of the match was a pint of Guinness. It was, it was just great. It was really, really
good laugh.
Yeah. I was about, 18. And they said, oh, you should come down and have a tryout. And I went down there, and they said, well, we can always use a left-footed player. So I used to, and to be honest, the way the manager tells it now, Nicky Ironton, was and I think I remember this, was they were sort of being diplomatic, telling me thanks but no thanks, and I would just keep coming to training until somebody. I was missing. I still missed that little bit in my brain.
It went
over
your head.
Say yes or no. It's like I'm really terrible at reading between the lines about what's going on, and so I just kept coming until they told me anything else, and then I got on the bench for a game in pre-season against Stevenage Borough, which was the big local team, and our striker Greg Pike, who'd scored 150,000 goals a season before, broke his leg in a tackle right in front of me. Don't think he ever played again. And they just slung me on and said, go up front. And it really was, you know, pardon the pun, a lucky break for me, at least. I didn't score in that particular game, but they must have seen something, and they just kept playing. And we, to be fair, we had an amazing. I was so raw and so naive about life and football, everything really. And I ran around a lot, and I tackled and kicked and headed whatever came anywhere near me. But I had a very, very good team, and scored quite a few goals. And then Cambridge signed me for about 10 grand or something. And then that was it. And I just always remember thinking, and I've always had this feeling, like it's sort of an imposter syndrome feeling, which was that they don't know what they've let in the door, not in a pompous way, just in a way like they don't realize what they've let in the door, and they're not going to be able to get me back out. That's how I felt. And I tried to carry myself like that through my career. And later on, it came out in different unflattering guises. But initially, it manifested itself in a lot of hunger and a lot of resilience and a lot of self-confidence. And it did well for me. And they were sort of good attributes to have.
So obviously you had a couple of years at Cambridge, sort of that early stages of your professional career. When Reading happened, was that you spoke to the coaches? Was it through an agent, or was it because you had a brilliant time at Cambridge and you were sort of getting word from other teams? How did that sort of happen?
Yeah, no, just organically, really. If you score, Cambridge United had a huge reputation for selling strikers. Selling players, but particularly strikers, starting with Dion Dublin, moved on to Jamie Cureton, Steve Claridge, Trevor Benjamin, Martin Butler, Zima Abbey. All those guys were there. And if you did well, you got sold. And that's how Cambridge survived and carved out survival. And I was just the latest in a long line of strikers that just so happened to have scored more than they did. So and they had a very clear price gradient, pegged to the football economy, which was, if it was $1 million there, then it's 2, and now it's 3, and kits will be 4. That's just, and everyone was on board with that. And then ITV Digital collapsed. And I don't know if you remember ITV Digital, but
slightly too young for that.
Very, very early forerunner of the digital sector and the way that sport in particular was consumed, but the uptake was poor, and it went bust, and it primarily served to as a benefactor for football clubs in the same way that Sky does today, but it relies on subscribers, but it didn't have the numbers, and it went bust, and it left a huge hole in the pockets of football league clubs. And there was a fire sale, essentially, is what happened. So my transfer fee went from 4 million, which was being bandied around, to £150,000.
Yeah, wow.
And I remember the game after ITV Digital went bust, they were handing out buckets around Cambridge. You remember, you don't see that very often these days, but I always remember it being quite a common occurrence. At least once a season, one club was handing out buckets. And they were handing out buckets. And I think the fans were promised something akin to, if you raise 100 grand, or it might even be 50, something like in the order of that number, then we won't have to sell Dave and other players. Of course, they raised the money, and then a week later they sold me anyway. And the fans were none too happy, and I was told that the chairman had gone on to the pitch to explain and been heckled off and booed off. But by then I'd moved on, and I was at Reading, and every time I go down to Cambridge, it rankles with them a lot, the fact that the transfer fee was 150. Given what I did later at Reading, it really yeah, it really was an unfortunate situation. And of course, Olsey had a sell-on fee as well, which for a non-league club could have made a huge, if selling players for 4 million, getting a 10% of that, would be very nice. But so they got the square root of nothing, and so it just had a terrible knock-on effect in football.
When Reading came knocking and the deal all went through, was that something that came out of the blue, or was that something that you gradually had been built to? Was there rumours that it was going to happen, or was there any other clubs involved?
Yeah, there were Rotherham made a bid, I believe, and Cardiff made a bid. Cardiff at that time had a very good team, and they had Rob Earnshaw. I never got the chance to speak to Cardiff, but I do remember thinking, well, Rob Earnshaw's never not going to play. And I remember looking at Reading thinking Sean Gota, could learn a lot from him. I remember vividly thinking that I could learn a lot from him, because I remember his City days. He was obviously an absolute legend. And they still have Sean Gota Day in Bermuda. That's
how good he was.
The mark of the man. Yeah. I mean, we don't even have Dave Kitson Day in his house. I was dedicated to having a day. And just the loveliest man in football. And then Nicky Forster, who I was obviously getting on in years as well. So I remember thinking, well, look, even if I go there for a season, I can eventually do something. And not really paying too much attention to the fact that, well, I have just scored 25 goals in a team that's finished mid-table. Still quite respectful of the fact that I would have to earn my passage, so to speak. And that's what I did. So I went with the right mentality. I'm going to have to knuckle down and earn the right to get into this team. And obviously, it's the best football decision I've ever made, given what happened later. But I remember it all being done quite quickly. I changed agents as well, and that had expedited the whole process. I was. It all happened quite quickly, given the fact that Cambridge needed the money, and Reading, when they found lower league players, as was the model that they adopted, didn't hang about. If Brian McDermott, who was the scout at that time, was absolutely sure that we should be going for this, everyone backed his judgment, and it would happen quite quickly. And I just remember being at Cambridge one day, and then the next day I was driving into Reading's training ground to train.
Yeah. So you signed for Reading on Boxing Day 2003. And I was listening to a podcast you were on a couple of years back, and was there a bit of a controversial outfit you wore on your first day at Reading?
Yeah, I didn't, because I'm not of the football world in a lot of senses. I didn't know what do you wear when you get signed and you get paraded around, and on the back of the newspaper, and this is obviously ridiculous now, was Hernan Crespo, who just signed for Chelsea, in a little white t-shirt and one of those little scarves that don't do anything other than just sit there and be ridiculous. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Hernan Crespo, certainly good enough for Dave Kitson. So I went along, and I just remember Steve Coppell and all the lads just looking at me like, what the hell is this? But that was a perfect metaphor for my sort of career. It was always, what the hell's this? And then you began to play, and they would say, oh, okay,
it's okay, we let him off, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I never gave too much of a shit in terms of what I looked like, what car I drove. I never owned a watch. I just wasn't into those things. I just wanted to play football. And that, on the one hand, that made it quite difficult to embed myself with teams. But on the other hand, I was true to who I was or to who I am as person, you know. So yeah, it certainly for that period of time at Reading, it worked well for me.
Do you think that on that? Sorry, do you think that your person, because a lot of players, not just yourself, but Steve Coppell and Brian, they're very well known names. They're very, I mean, what I know, what I hear, people have got on with them very well. Do you think that your personality just worked in that environment with that club and with that pair?
Yeah, I think the squad, I think once it was assembled, what it had going for it was roughly the same age.
Mm-hmm.
It was relatively underpaid, given what else was being paid in the Championship at that time. It was unbelievably hungry to prove itself both individually and collectively, as were the people running the club. You know, Sir John was, I have to call him Sir John. The last time, after he got his knighthood, I've forgotten, about 10 years ago, and I bumped into him in a restaurant, and I forgot he'd just been knighted, and he said, and I said, "Oh, hi, John," and he slapped me around the back of the head. It's Sir John.
Yeah.
I always call him Sir John. I don't forget after that. There's not too many people I let slap me around the head, but Sir John. Yeah, but obviously he was desperately keen to get Reading and himself to the Premier League, you know. Steve was desperately keen. Nick Hammond was in the role of director of football, wanted to prove himself. Brian McDermott, the chief scout, wanted to prove himself. So it had all of that go. Everyone was on the same page, you know, which is, if you look at what's happening now, is certainly not the case. But that is what Reading Football Club is. You know, it's not. It's not. It's not a big secret what we achieved. It's just a very sensible approach to building a football club. It's one of many ways to build a football club. It's the way that works for Reading, and it's the way that we understand it. So, yeah, it had all of those things going for it. And then obviously within that came some mechanisms to enhance what we had, the way that we grouped together. But it needed personalities in the right place, you know. So you had your funny guys, you know, and then you had your serious guys, and then you had your little bit of experience, and you had those personalities all working, and nobody really trying to be anything that they weren't.
Yeah.
So once you signed for Reading, you think it was your first 17 games in that first 6 months. You scored 5 goals. Moving on to your next full season, where I think you scored 19 goals in a full season. That next summer was then leading into 2005-2006 season, was the famous 106 season. Individually, you'd done very well, and you just mentioned there that the team was really hungry. And that summer they signed Kevin Doyle, Leroy Lita. Was the aim that season to be promoted, or was that an internal thing you didn't want to let out, or what was the aim that season? Because you just missed out in the playoffs just before, hadn't you?
Yeah, we'd missed out, I think, perhaps on the 2 or 3 games before the end of the season. I'd had a bad knee injury that had cost us goals, certainly, in games where those missed goals may have influenced how many points we took, perhaps. Who's to say? But certainly the board and Steve identified that we can't have an entire season with kits and no one else supporting. If he gets injured, we're going to need somebody. So they identified Leroy Lita from Bristol City. That was the primary signing to play alongside with me. And then they stumbled upon Kevin Doyle, thanks to Pat Dolan, who was Eamon Dolan's brother, who I believe was an agent out in Ireland, who invited Brian McDermott along to watch Kevin playing for Cork, where he'd scored 20-odd goals or something like that. And I think he played. I remember Brian saying he hadn't done very well, but then everyone had left, all the scouts had left, but then Kevin scored 2, I think, in the last couple of minutes, and they won the game. And Brian always used to say to me as a scout, you have to stay until the end. You always have to stay until the end. And they signed him. And as I understand it, and I don't obviously have the full details, I think Steve went over to watch as well. And just to give the final, yeah, okay, you know, he'll do for us kind of thing. And as I understood it, they did a deal on the spot for 70 grand. And they also said, well, listen, his mate is here. He might want to keep him company. It's called Shane Long.
Not a bad player.
Yeah, and you can have him for 10,000 if you want him just as a bit of company. So we got Kevin Doyle and Shane Long for 80 grand.
Wow.
So our strike force going into the next season was myself, Leroy Leiter, Kevin Doyle and Shane Long. And that is, if you're going to do something in the Championship, that's not a bad strike force to have. And the team was another year older, a couple of additions. And I didn't know anything about Kev, but when Kev came and he played in the first training session, and you know, he was kind of, okay, well, let's have a look then. And I remember thinking, I knew I was going to start with Leroy up front that season, but I remember looking at Kev thinking, well, he works as hard as I do. And if we've got two players like that working that hard, we're really going to do something. And I hadn't seen him play a game or score a goal or any of that stuff. I just remember looking at the work rate thinking, it'd be nice to have a bit of help with that up front this year. And then Leroy unfortunately got injured and Kev got his chance. And that really is what came about. And the fortunate thing for Steve Coppell, in one respect, is that if one of us was, there was never a time where all four of us were all fit. There may have been one game, but largely during that season, one or two of us were always injured. So he had a really easy job of just was always play two up front. So he always had that. And it kind of worked out really well. And of course, when you came back from being injured, you saw what was happening. You were like, right, I've got to step up and need to nail down that place. And Steve was very good like that. He always used to say, regarding the shirt, possession was 9/10. You know, it's 9/10 of the law. If you've got the shirt, it's yours until it ain't. So, yeah, and I respected him for that as a manager.
Yeah, and you sort of, go on, Tate.
So ironically, you actually lost the first game of the season, didn't you? And then I think you went on a long, was it a 30-game unbeaten spell? Was that a really good team atmosphere, and did everyone get along in that environment?
I think most people got along. I think the people that didn't get along tolerated one another. You know, because like for the reasons I've mentioned, we're all trying to get to the same place, and that really took precedent over any sort of trivial personality disputes that there may have been. You know, when things aren't going well, those are the little things that blow up. But when you're doing quite well, those are the things that are very easy to put to bed. Yeah, we lost the first game and then we went 33 games unbeaten. And actually somebody asked me the other day, when did you know that you were going to do something that season? And it was the third game. We went to Brighton away and we beat them at their old stadium, which was, God. Yeah, which was
not one to remember.
Oh, thank God they've moved. I mean, that was an experience, actually. It's a rite of passage to say that you played at that ground as well. But the third game, we went to Preston. Very, very sound Championship club, always vying for the playoffs. And we absolutely destroyed them to the point where it's only happened twice in my career, but we went down to the far end to applaud our fans, turned around to walk back into the tunnel, which is at the far end, directly opposite, and all the Preston fans had stayed. The Preston players were off the pitch and they'd stayed and they applauded us. The whole stadium applauded us off the pitch, and that's really a rare thing in football.
Yeah, definitely.
And I knew we'd played well. You know, we won 3-0, but it could have been anything. But we played really well and we looked like a team. That's anyone can play well in one game, but we looked like a team doing it, like a real team that had played together for a long time, and to get that seal of approval, if you like, from the home fans, the Preston's was and the fact that it stayed with me as well, and I can still see it vividly. That meant a lot. Maybe the Preston fans don't even realise how much that spurred us on for the season.
It probably might have even helped your side that year.
I think it did. I certainly think it did. And then I think from the Brighton game, it was 33 games unbeaten. Yeah, it's a remarkable run.
Yeah, and on that group that obviously got promoted, are you still in contact with any of those players, any of those guys that you still?
Yeah, well, James Harper, the midfielder that we had, unbelievably talented player. He's working with me at the academy. Glenn Little, I see a lot. Unbelievable winger. What a winger he was! Wow. Ivar Ingimarsson. I talked to him a lot over there in Iceland. I went to visit him. It took me 10 hours to drive to his house.
Bro, that's a brave decision.
Yeah. It was only one. You can't fly. You can't fly directly there. You have to drive to it. So it's you land in Reykjavik and then you drive around Egilsdor and 10 hours. And he showed me where he used to play football as well. And it's just surrounded by a fjord on 3 sides.
Wow.
It's just he said if you were winning, you time wasted. You just booted the ball. Guy would row out to go and get the ball. But it's interesting because he's officially the loneliest player in the Premier League. He comes from the smallest town of anybody ever to play in the Premier League. It's like 60 people in his village, and to become a Premier League footballer, you're odds against. So and I love stories like that. So I keep in contact with a lot. Sol Ki-hyun, who was a year after, Nicky Shorey I spoke to the other day, Leroy Lita I'm seeing on Sunday for a beer.
Nice.
So we all sort of, we're not one of those groups that feels like we need a WhatsApp group and we have to send each other, non-funny messages every 5 minutes. But it is.
You're not a fan of a group chat then.
Well, you can tell, can't you? I'm just not time for stuff like that. But you pick the phone up and it's like, Ibrahim Asonko, our centre half, who's living in Belgium now with his partner and children, and you hadn't spoken to him for a little while, and just pick the phone up, and suddenly it's like back in the changing room, just talking about whatever we talk about.
On that last game of the season, I think you had to win to get the points record. Was it? Was there a big party afterwards? Was there any plans trip by the chairman or anything like that? No,
and that's very Reading. Steve didn't like he didn't like the press. He didn't like the press intrusion. Didn't like to draw attention to us. Didn't like us talking to the press. Wanted to go really under the radar, and we did it the best we could. It's possibly a factor as to why the club never really gets the credit. I mean, if you ask 9 out of 10 people in the street who has the championship points record, I don't think many people would know that it's Reading. But if Leicester beat it this season, as looks that they will, everyone will know that it was Leicester who have it. It's one of those. That's what Reading is, and we don't mind that. That's how we are, or should be rather, how we were. But it's typical that in the last game when we beat QPR and we broke the points record and we're standing up in the, everyone was like, well, where do we? All our fans are on the pitch. What do we do? We'll go up to the director's box. Got ushered up there, just give them a wave and say thanks. It was one of those, and then you kind of realise that you're standing there like balcony, kind of. This is getting a bit awkward now. And then somebody scared up, half a dozen bottles of Bucks Fizzle. So it wasn't even champagne. I don't know, you don't waste good champagne. And it's like half a dozen bottles of Bucks Fizz or Carver or something that had been sat in someone's fridge for decades. Spray those. That was and that was it. Then we all disappeared into the changing room and left to go on holiday. But I do remember I do remember afterwards I went to Ivar Ingimarsson's house with my wife and Ivar and his wife and Brynjar Gunnarsson and his wife. And we all just sat in the hot tub drinking champagne. And that was how we did things, you know. It wasn't like a great big go out into town and go mad. It was just that's, you know, I still think if you owned Reading Football Club and you listened to some of these stories and how it is and how the people are and how it ought to run, and you heard things like that, you would have a much better understanding and a much better decision-making process towards maneuvering that club into what it should be and what it represents, rather than trying to make it something that it isn't.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, you but got promoted to the Premier. You're now a Premier League player, and you actually scored in the first game? Was that right, Tate? You scored the first goal.
Yeah, the first Reading goal, wasn't it? First ever Reading Premier League goal.
Yeah. So Reading had before that inaugural Premier League season, Reading had never been in the top. Forget the Premier League. It had never been in the top flight. In 100, and Reading's a very old club. But it had never been in the top division ever. So that first goal. So I didn't really realise about the points record, to be honest. I didn't realise when Kevin Doyle scored the goal, the equaliser at Leicester, that would be the goal that got us promoted. So that annoyed me. So I paid attention when someone told me that the first goal, whoever scores this first goal is going to, that's it. There's only
one, I suppose.
Yeah, there's 92 clubs, professional clubs, and obviously a few more that come up through the national leagues, etc., that go on to become. But so, whatever it is, 100, 110 clubs, it can only ever be one person who's going to do that. And I remember that actually making a bit of an impact on me. I think whatever happens, I have to get this first goal. It's going to go down in history. And fortunately, I got it. And it's possibly the worst goal I've ever scored in my life. But it's like I say to the kids I coach now, it doesn't say when it pops up.
It just says your name and who
goal. It doesn't say 30 yards, overhead kick or any of that rubbish. It's just there. So perhaps that's where I get it from. Just you only have to get the ball from here over this line. That's it. I don't care how you do it. So that was very important to me, and it is one of the things that I'm most proud of.
Unfortunately, you suffered quite a bad injury in this game, didn't you? And that kept you out for up until January, was it?
Yeah. It was that was as good as it got for me that season. It was all those years of trying to get to the Premier League, and it got taken away after about 40 minutes. And that was hard. That was really, really hard. And that was the first time where I ever felt a bit sorry for myself. Like, I've been trying harder than anyone to get this football club into the Premier League. I'd had 2 years before of grafting up front on my own, trying to score the goals to get this club to the Premier League. Finally done it. Finished top scorer in that 106 season. Just scored the first goal, thinking my career is going to go in all directions now. But not where can I go? It was always where can Reading go? Where can we go? How big can we get? And it all just got taken away inside after about 40 minutes. And it was an awful tackle, and it took a long time to get back. And I had setbacks. I came back in the first training session. I came back after months, pulled my hamstring because my body is just gone on shutdown. Tried to get over that, then my appendix burst. It was just a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And I had to watch all the guys, I had to watch Kev and Leroy scoring all these goals and doing really well and getting international call-ups, and it was so hard to take. And then I think I came back in the game against Newcastle at home. That was also Michael Owen's comeback, because he'd done his cruciate, I think, possibly at the World Cup, or
did it for England in 2006, wasn't it?
Yeah. And that was his first game back, and it was my first game back. And even that, I kind of thought, oh, that's good, because that takes the focus away from me, because it'll all be about him. And it was. And we beat them, and I managed to score in my first game back. The funny thing about that goal was it came to me, and I volleyed it. And I think it was Sibierski? Somebody like that. Came running across to close me down with his arms up like this, and I'd volleyed it, and I kicked his arm and broke his arm on the follow through. And I just remember thinking, there's the yin and yang balance.
Yeah.
Somebody comes back and somebody has to go out.
Strange how it all works.
Yeah. So no, it was odd, but that was nice. And I remember sort of running over and jumping into the crowd. And I think the referee knew how long I'd been out, so I don't think he even booked me for it. Kind of just let him have his moment.
Yeah.
And we beat them. And but yeah, I was never, after that tackle, I was never the same player. I had to totally change the way I played, the way my body moved on the pitch, the way I kicked the ball with my right leg. Couldn't kick the ball the same anymore. And it was just, it was tough. It was very tough.
Yeah, don't mind, but obviously I've researched a little bit and found some things, but you're an advocate for mental health and support and all that, but pretty much when it wasn't fashionable. Because if you look now, there's lots of talk and there's lots of players and scenarios that happen. But do you think it sort of stemmed from that moment, that injury, or was it long before that when you were growing up? Why was that such a thing for you? And you're like I said, you're an advocate for that.
No, I suffered for years. I think it might be a family thing. I'm not sure. I suffered from it, from depression as a kid, anxiety when I got older. I'm on some fairly heavy duty medication now, which keeps me going. And talking is always a good thing. And I understand the stigma. I understand the reluctance from, the world is a nasty old place, and it seems to be getting nastier to me, and I think it's more important than ever. So when I coach the kids, that's a huge element of it. It is the mental health. If you're not feeling up to snuff, you talk to someone, your teacher, your parent, your friend, just talk to somebody. Just, it's the numbers are just staggering for the amount of, so Liam Paul, who I mentioned before from Sainsbury's. So there were four of us, another chap called Martin, and sort of inseparable. And Martin hanged himself, and so that had a huge impact on me. And there still isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about him, and in the context that could easily have been me, certainly at my lowest ebb. And I think you just have to catch yourself every now and again when you feel yourself going down that spiral. There's nothing wrong with talking about it. You have to. But yeah, going first was. Do you remember how I said that I had this kind of a serious head on, that I had to be that way?
Yeah. So
given that I had that persona, if you like, certainly in the media and to the fans, I think when I sort of decided, right, I'm going to talk about this before anybody else was really talking about it, I think it may have resonated, because I don't know. Not like I go around doing straw polls or anything, but may have resonated because it came from someone who was serious. It wasn't.
True, you weren't in the papers and you weren't doing stupid things. You were, like you said, you were.
I was focused on football, and it was all of that. And I think that may have carried a bit of weight, and then it just sparked a huge conversation. And we are where we are today. But I'm always keen to point out, you don't have to come out and say anything if you don't want to. You still have that prerogative as a human being to be as private as you like, but don't be the martyr to somebody.
Definitely. And I said, is that an area you focus with the coaching with the kids and whatever you're dealing with now? That's a main sort of part of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's huge. I always, it's because you'll see the same kids over and over again. Sometimes they turn up and they're, and sometimes they don't. I sort of trained myself to notice it. I did a lot of courses on it, a lot of online things. It's not about gaining certificates for the sake of it. It's about trying to learn something. What are the signs? What am I looking for? And then actually putting it to use. So it is a huge thing. So when I go all around Berkshire doing talks at schools, and they all have, I've got a bag of shirts here that I'm looking at, and I bought home today. They're all the shirts that I've collected over the years, like Xabi Alonso and Ferdinand and Vidic and Bale. But all those guys on those shirts, all those names, all have a story to tell about when things weren't going well. So it's not just about the name on the shirt and the badge and you forming a perception. You see Rio Ferdinand's name on a Man United shirt and you immediately think, whatever, good times. But underneath that shirt is a guy who's had to go through some struggles, and it's the same for all of those shirts. And so I kind of tell those stories, not their stories for them, they're not my stories to tell, but just making the point that, look, all these guys you see on telly, they've all had to come through some kind of some difficulties. But what they've got in common is that they all talk to someone. They all found a little bit of help. And it's really important that you guys do too. So that's generally the message of it. And then I do a sort of a corporate version as well with the shirts, with the stories are much more different.
A few on-pitch tales.
So but none of them that I'm going to tell here. Camera phones are banned.
Just moving back to Reading there. So the second season was personally a more successful season for you, goals wise and appearance wise, but not so much for Reading. Was there anything that changed in pre-season? Do you think it was a bit like the classic second season syndrome, or what was it that? Because the first season you finished just a point outside the Europa League playoffs, and then the second season, unfortunately, it was goal difference, wasn't it? It was Roy Hodgson's Fulham, I think, just pipped you by a few goals.
Yeah, they did. It's I think the frustrating thing was that Fulham had Portsmouth on the last day, but Portsmouth had got through to the FA Cup final, so they'd rested most of their team, which these days you'd have something to say about that. But at the time seemed one of those things which was, oh well, that's just the way the fixtures have panned out. Took it on the chin, but it was a real difficult one to take because Portsmouth with a full team probably would have won that game and we'd have stayed up. But there again, relying on other people means you haven't done your own job very well, and we hadn't. And I think that season our heads got turned a lot. Everyone was suddenly the focus of some sort of interest from another side. That had a big impact. And collectively and individually, we took our eye off the ball. And also we didn't recruit as well as perhaps we might have, both in terms of the quality and in terms of the numbers that we probably needed. And there's no one to blame for that. You can't recruit well every single season. And also it's, well, how do you start changing players who have done so well the season before? How do you start saying to them, well, actually, we're going to bring in this international? Hang on a minute, we've just finished 8th with Reading here. Whereas these days, that would be a very the cutthroat nature of the Premier League. That wouldn't even be a consideration. If you could get an upgrade, you'd do it.
Yeah.
It seems to me, not all the time, but it seems to me certainly to be the case most of the time. But Reading wasn't like that. Reading was a very loyal football club, both the players to it and it to the players. And perhaps maybe that loyalty ran its course a little bit towards the end. But certainly wasn't anybody's fault. It was just a collection of unfortunate.
Yeah, like Tate said, do you think, and you sort of mentioned, do you think it could just be rotten luck, essentially, like you said, the season before was so close to Europe, and that second season just ever so finally being relegated, it could be some bad luck.
Yeah, we had a run in January where we lost 8 games on the spin. So we were fine. Before January, we were fine. Mid-table, comfortably mid-table. I think I was the top man. I can't remember if I was the top scorer in the Premier League or the top English goal scorer in the Premier League. One of those anyway. And then we hit January and it was a disaster. We think we lost eight games in a row. We couldn't recruit. We persevered. The mood just nosedived, and we just couldn't get it together. And then we started doing things out of character in terms of, right, we want you all into the hotel before the home match. We'd never done that. Little things like that, and that had a sense of, it had an air of desperation about it. We don't do this. Why are we doing it? All right, we're clearly trying to find some magic.
Something,
Yes, there's something to tip the balance in our favour, and I'm not convinced that it's getting us away from our families and slinging us in a foreign bed in a foreign hotel, before a big game. I'm not convinced that's the way to go. So all these, then you start having an internal battle with yourself, and then people start sniping, what are we doing this? And then human nature, actually, it's not our fault, is it? It's obviously that guy over there. And now that shit starts to happen. And it's really hard to arrest that once that kicks in.
Having been relegated, sitting in that changing room the last day of the season, what was going through your head? Were you thinking, I've just scored 10 goals in the Premier League, I need to stay in the Premier League, or I want to stay with Reading and I need to get this club back where it should be, back in the Premier League?
Yeah, I remember feeling utterly dejected, and the first thing I remember thinking was, I wanted to stay with Reading, but the first thing I remember thinking was, my God, that was a long season in the Championship last time. We're never going to get 106 points again. That's never going to happen. It's going to be much harder, and all that kind of, but. And then over the course of the summer, having a sort of well, it is what it is. We're just going to have to get on with it. If we want to get back to the Premier League, we're going to have to get on with it. And then I was told that, or my agent was told that we'd have to balance the books, and I was the obvious choice to be sold. And I just remember thinking that was so. Don't get me wrong, I was interested to see what was out there. Of course, you never know what might happen and who might come in for you. But at the same time, I wanted to stay in Reading. We just had our first child. We had a nice house, a good life. I lived equidistant from the training ground and I could see the stadium from my back garden. I was so happy, and so was my wife. And then I was told that I would have to be sold to balance the books, and that they were going to accept offers in this region. And I just remember thinking, that's so short-sighted. We're selling 20 odd goals for £5.5–6 million or whatever it was. But the bet that we're making here is, will those 20 odd goals get us £160 million if you want to take it on a purely monetary level? I was taking it on a, can we get back to the Premier League? Obviously it's one and the same, it's just a different way of looking at it. But if you're going to gamble £5.5 million against 160 million, seems like a gamble worth making. but they had made their mind up that, you know, we'll cash in on Dave. We've got Shane Long here; he's ready to step in, and so I could see the logic in it. But I thought it was maybe a year too early. But that was it. They'd made the decision, and I had to leave.
You ended up signing for Stoke for a record, I think it was £5.5 million. Was there a few clubs interested, or was it you wanted to go to Stoke because that was the best of the options, or was it the manager that you felt that you wanted to play for, or was it? What was it that...
I think Hull had made a bid. I didn't want to go to Hull. Nothing against Hull. I just didn't want to. Didn't think they would survive in the Premier League for 1 second. I think they did. I can't remember. And Aston Villa. And Aston Villa had John Carew, who was obviously their big man. If you want to be crude about it, but and he was a cult hero. They loved him, and you know, pretty decent player. And I just remember thinking, well, I'm not going to play there. It doesn't matter how much money they offer me. I'm just going to sit there on the bench, and then I'll end up being. I could map out what would happen. I'm going to, you know, I'll go out on loan. And I remember thinking, I'll go out on loan and I'll end up playing against Reading. That would be a nightmare. I remember thinking that. So I kind of made a big decision based on not wanting to play against Reading. And I ended up going to Stoke. And the mistake I made there was I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know anything about Tony Pulis. I didn't know anything about the way he played football. I could easily have done a bit of research to find out, you know, well, how do these guys? Does it suit me? How do they play? What are they? You know, what about this manager? Who is he? What is he? And I didn't ask a single. I did nothing. I didn't ask a single person, and that was a huge mistake. These days, I think it's such that if you were to move club, I think you would just, from the amount of football on television, you would just know. You know, you would know when if Leicester come up this year, Southampton, I would know how they play. So I wouldn't even have to look. But back then, I didn't. I didn't, and I didn't ask any questions to my detriment. Ultimately,
was that the first year that Stoke had come up? So they were a newly promoted team, yeah. Because I think, to be honest, I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. I think the long throw in, the tactics there caught a lot of Premier League teams by surprise. I remember, I think it was opening day. Maybe Everton or Villa, they caused havoc with them throws. And myself being an Arsenal fan, I remember, I think Stoke beat us numerous times at the Britannia. And even when the first time they came up, they beat us 2-1, both goals from throw-ins. And Wenger would come out and lambate Stoke and Tony Pulis for this style of play and anti-football and all this sort of stuff. Did that build a sort of us against the world sort of atmosphere at Stoke? Or
I'm a huge fan of Wenger and how he changed the game in this country, and probably ultimately in Europe to a certain extent. I very much liked his philosophy. I liked the way he changed diets for players. The things he did, you know, a lot of it can be traced back to Wenger. In this country, the good things, but I did think that he was getting a bit precious about it, and you know, we all have to play this way. You know, well, we can't because we can't all take kids out of Barcelona's academy at 16 and try to get them to come to Stoke. You know, we're not in that position. We can't do it. We might be able to get Dave Kitson from Reading out of the Championship. That's where we are. So I thought he was getting a bit precious. I don't know if there was anything though going on privately between Wenger and Pulis, but they certainly disliked one another. I think personally, and obviously our approach to football. But and coming out and sort of saying that's anti-foot, it just played into our hands. I'm not sure if he knew how damaging it was to his team, because we lined up in the changing room. I think John Walters tells a story where he's 6 foot and he's the smallest guy in the team. And Well, you have to question John Walters if he's 6'.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that one.
Have to be interested to see his driving license. But it was the land of the giants, you know, and teams would turn up, and you could psych them in the tunnel. You know, you felt it. You just looked straight forward. You'd hear that unbelievable roar at the Britannia as it was then, and that has an impact on you. The only team that were never ever scared of us, probably two teams that were never ever scared of us, were United and Chelsea, because physically they could go toe to toe. But certainly when Arsenal turned up, they were intimidated. I remember Santi Cazorla, I think it was Santi Cazorla, kind of looking over at us and looking along the line, and you could see him thinking, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And you have to play on that, whether you like it or not. You know, you want to try to win the game. And I remember Arsenal always playing within themselves at Britannia. But then again, you know, we were physical with them. We were told to be physical with them. You know, it was more than one occasion in training where the corner would come in and you'd have Rob Huth and Ryan Shaw cross, and it was, listen, if you miss the ball, fine, but you're not missing the goalkeeper. So it was all of that. And unfortunately that culminated in Aaron Ramsey breaking his leg. And I remember, I think I was on the bench for that game, and I remember looking straight down the line of it and seeing Aaron Ramsey there. Right, so Ryan Shawcross just overran the ball. There's absolutely no intention from Ryan to injure anybody whatsoever. He overran the ball. He was trying to reach the ball to make a tackle, and he caught Ramsey badly. And unfortunately, because he was a wonderful player, Ramsey broke his leg. And I just remember being right down the line of Aaron Ramsey and just seeing the bottom half of his leg facing the other way. And I remember Wenger turning around, and it was really a strange moment, because I remember Wenger turning round and looking at me. Obviously, I was the first person in his line of sight, but to me, it felt like all of his frustration and anger was directed at me. And I remember having a bit of an epiphany in that moment, thinking that he must be really disappointed in me for being here.
Yeah,
that sounds strange, but maybe that look, it was all, and it probably wasn't. A lot of this is bullshit in my head, he looked like a man who was looking at me saying, "I'm surprised you would be a part of this." That's the look he gave me. And I had an epiphany, and I decided right there and then that I didn't want to play for Stoke anymore. I didn't want to be a part of this, even though it was an accident. And I firmly believe that. I know that it was an accident. But I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
So you spent 2 years there, and then you think you had a couple of loans. You went back to Reading on loan at some stage, and then you went to loan to Borough.
Yeah.
Was there a reason it just didn't quite work at Stoke? Was it a clash of personalities with the manager? Because he wasn't really playing you in your position, was he? You went there as a striker, but ended up playing midfield. And why do you think that just?
I don't know why. The annoying thing, I think the manager was protecting himself, whereas I think the good managers these days would say, like, if you take somebody like Joel Linton, clearly bought as a striker, now playing in midfield, the manager makes the explanation to the fans, and the fans say, "Oh, okay," and then the player proves himself in that position. Alan Smith at Man United, it's happened a few times. And I thought I sort of got left out to dry a little bit, where it was, he's supposed to be scoring all of these goals for us, but not saying, well, we're playing him in midfield at the moment, because what we're trying to do is play Ricardo Fuller up front on his own and let him get on with it, frankly, which he did. He was a very talented player. So my running stats were always off the charts, always outran everybody else on the pitch. The effort was always there. But couldn't nick a goal because of the way we played. It was very much we're playing in our own half, and if we do get out of our half, it's going to be for set pieces, and then it's just the luck of the draw who it falls to. It fell to me a couple of times, and more often than not, you would aim for Ricardo Fuller, or you would aim for Rob Huth and Ryan Shawcross to head it and try and get on any. You're feeding off scraps a little bit, and it's not really a way for a striker to play football. But it was effective. But I just thought a little bit more support there, just to say, well, look, this is what we're trying to do. But I felt a little bit isolated in that moment. And if you had come out and said, no, actually, this is what we're doing with Dave, we're shifting position because we like him in here and it's working for us, then who knows what could happen? I could have been there quite happily, would have said, okay, well, I'm not a striker anymore. This is my new life as a footballer. And things might have worked out differently. But I do remember feeling like I was doing an effective job, but feeling very isolated from the people who perhaps should have been helping me a little bit more.
Yeah, people didn't, like the fans I might have seen it. It's
yeah.
Like I mentioned, you then left Stoke after 2 seasons and joined Portsmouth. You did a couple of years there. They went into admin whilst you were there, and then that moved. Then you then retire and then move on to Sheffield United. Had a little bit of a spell there, and then on to Oxford, where you ended your career.
Yeah.
How was that sort of coming a play? Did you feel ready to finish at Oxford, or?
Well, I tried to retire 3 times, and I tried to retire at Portsmouth. I wrote off at least £1 million at Portsmouth in unpaid wages. I don't like talking about Portsmouth. It was such a depressing, miserable time. I was lucky enough there that they had a doctor called Greg Warner who probably saved my life. I would go so far as to say literally saved my life with medication. And he just looked at me one day and he just went, "You're not right, follow me." And he was very senior in some committee in the south of England. He sat on and he chaired, and to do with mental health. And I just knew he'd busted me. I was trying to hide it, and I just knew he'd busted me straight away. And he got me the help that I needed. But I remember being so suicidal in those days. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. And I just decided to retire on the. I couldn't put one foot in front of the other on the pitch. And just, yeah, it was awful. I hated it. I don't really like thinking about it, but
it's fine. We don't have to. Yeah, we can.
And then I went to, and then I retired, and then I bumped into Simon McCabe, whose family owned Sheffield United. Kevin McCabe, the chairman at Sheffield United, and they had obviously a problem with Ched Evans, and said, "Look, we're confident that he's going to win his appeal. Can you help us until that happens?" For a few months of the first half of the season. So I said, "Well, I've retired." And then I remember thinking, well, I don't want to leave my career as it finished at Portsmouth, and I know Sheffield United to be a great club. We had some tremendous matches with them again, Reading v Sheffield United. Some real good battles, real honest club, good fans, and had a lot of time for Sheffield United. And I thought, yeah, that could be a good club to say goodbye to football. Got to the middle of the season, and of course, Ched didn't. They didn't get him off, and I ended up staying till the end of the season, and didn't get to we got to the playoffs. We lost to Yeovil, who then beat Brentford in the final and got promoted, and it was all change again. So I left and I retired again, and I was just sat at home in the summer, and I got a call from Chris Wilder, and Chris said, "Come up to Oxford. We're trying to do something here." And I just, Chris, I've retired. It's, and I did feel, going up through the leagues was really exciting. And I really tremendously admire those players who can come down the leagues and feel fresh and really enjoy going out to play football. But to me, it was a bit more, without being disparaging to anyone, I remember thinking, I'm not on the way up anymore. I'm on the way down, and I couldn't really, I couldn't reconcile the fact that I was still a professional footballer and what a privilege that is against the fact that I was on moving. I wasn't moving forward. I was on the way back down, and I just couldn't get over that bump. And I remember thinking, I've seen all this, I've done all this, and I'm failing. Every time I come down, I'm failing a little bit more, rather than thinking, oh, actually, I'm getting more games as a professional footballer. I'm lucky at this age of my life. I just couldn't push myself over that side of the fence. But I went up there, and I really liked Chris. I have to say, he sort of convinced me, and I signed a 2-year deal, and we were top of the league in January, and then they sacked him.
As you do.
Yeah, that's the normal way it goes.
And he went to Northampton, obviously, kept them up miraculously, and the next season got them promoted. And then in the summer, the most bizarre thing that ever happened to me, I think, in my career was we were in the cafeteria having lunch in pre-season, just about to start the second year at Oxford, and the doors swung open, and some guys in very sharp, severe suits walked in and said, "Hi, we're the new owners. We own a Formula One team around the corner," and it was this sort of aggressive. And I remember one sentence he came out with was, "If you're all good little footballers, we'll let you change the tyres on a real Formula One car."
That went down well.
Yeah, you don't need that.
Yeah, that did not go down very well at all. That was that's not how you endear yourself to a group of footballers. And then Gary Waddock, who was sat in the corner, lovely fella, the manager, they sacked him on the spot in front of all of the players, and then said, "And you're starting tomorrow, your new manager." And I remember thinking, whatever name he says here is the difference between this being my last day as a professional footballer tomorrow, or doing another year. And he said, "Michael Appleton." And I said, "Well, that's it." Michael Appleton was my manager at Portsmouth, and we didn't get it.
Yeah.
And next day he came up. I was walking out for training, and he came up. I could hear him coming running up behind me, and he just said, "Kits, what do you want to do then?" And I said, "I'm not playing for you." And he said, "Fine." It's obviously the answer he was looking for.
Yeah, of course.
The director of football will be in touch with you about your contract. You don't have to train today. And I went home, and that was the end of my career. That was it. End of my career as a professional footballer. It just ended like that. One day I was there with all the lads, and then the next day I was sat at home, didn't have a career anymore, didn't have anything. So, yeah, very abrupt.
Yeah.
So moving on to current day and post-football, you've started up your own Dave Kitson Academy. You want to tell us why that started and how that came about? Was that something you've always wanted to do when you finished, or was that something that's been a new lease of life you wanted to do?
Yeah, I got a call from a school here, Reading Bluecoat, which is a fantastic school, and just said, "Look, would you like to help us with our football team? We're rolling out our football program a little bit more." I'd never really given it any thought, to coaching anyone, but coaching kids as well. I'd never really given it much thought. And I went in, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was just and I still do it now. It's just I've been there since the summer. It's an amazing school. It's an amazing football program, and we've done really, really well. So the school had never been past the first round of any of the competitions before. They also play in the local league, and we've got to 3 quarterfinals. So they're across the nation, and I just thought, I love this. I want to do more of this. How can I do more coaching? How can I? And I just thought, well, just start an academy. There's enough kids around Berkshire and opportunities to coach. And so I did. I just started it up, and I thought, well, you see how it goes. And it just went nuts. I just got swamped, and I had to bring on James Harper, as I say, my old partner in crime at Reading. And the funny thing is that Reading are now sacking a lot of their academy coaches because of the ongoing situation there, and they're picking the phone up to me saying, can they come and get some work? Can they come and I'm just trying as hard as I can to find them as much work as I can, and luckily at the moment, because we're so swamped, we're able to do that. So every time Reading sack an academy coach, or make one redundant, we're trying to help them at the academy as well. And we get a lot of the academy kids come in for extra sessions as well. But our philosophy is that we'll coach anybody. It doesn't matter what level they're at. You don't have to be the best footballer ever. It's we literally coach everyone. And because Reading's such a it's very divided economically, and there is some poverty here. There's some households that obviously don't have extra funding for kids coaching sessions. So we've got a program in place where we'll subsidize that. And we've just actually taken on our first, we've only been going 2.5 months, and we've just started our first, we've just taken on our first academy player, which is being subsidized by a benefactor who wants to donate in order to get that kid some coaching sessions, which is just fantastic. And we're trying to do as much as we try and do our social media in all the local places where Reading fans eat and drink all around town, and then plugging their businesses, their eateries and their cafes and things like that. And it's just trying to help. I've been sort of adopted by Reading really in the town, and it's been good to me. And I'm not going to be as sappy as saying, "Oh, I'm trying to give back" and all of that.
Yeah.
But I do feel I certainly feel a pride in living in Reading. I do feel as if it's my home now. I've been here a long time, and it is nice to embed yourself in the community, and it is nice to get involved in things, and it does give you a bit of a warm feeling, So without going over the top and getting soppy about it, it does make you feel good. It's good for the endorphins.
Yeah, good.
Is that something you do 7 days a week and all age groups up to 18? Is it or?
Yeah, so we'll do. I mean, I coach 4-year-olds, boys and girls, up to. I coached a lady the other day. She won't mind if I mention her age. She was 45 and she wanted to do walking football. She wanted to work on her left foot. So I said,
better place to come to.
Yeah, Dave Kitson.
We can do that. But at the other end, got her son, who's 13, with James Harper, doing goalkeeping coaching. And he's a fantastic goalkeeper. So there's, it's just
all sorts. Yeah, brilliant.
There's loads of stuff going on. I've just come back from coaching sessions tonight. Just an under 12s team, girls team in Woodley, fantastic bunch. Took the mickey out of me mercilessly, but it's great. It's great fun, and I just go around as many schools as I can. I give talks. My shirts that I collected over the years, I never wanted to frame them and put them. You can see behind me. I never wanted to put them. I don't want to be reminded of those guys in my house, So I keep them all in one big bag, and then I go out and I do some coaching, and I let the kids put them on, and they're running around in Gareth Bale's shirt, and it's great. They love it, and that's what they should be for. Those shirts really should be inspiring the next generation of kids to play the game. So all those players who have got them in their pool rooms framed, shame on you.
No, I can see from the big smile on your face how much it means to you, and how much the coaching thing is enjoying it. How much, like you said, that being, you are giving back, and it's really nice to see, like you said, how much it means to you. Reverting back to the beginning of the show, just to wrap up, I asked you a question. Dave, you scored 3 hat-tricks for Reading. but which one did you score in the quickest time?
Oof. Were you going to give me the teams?
I can give you the teams
we'll
if you'd
give
like
you-
me to.
Give you
So-
that.
Against.
Brighton, West Ham, and Gillingham.
I'm going to say, do you know, I do the Gillingham game, I remember scoring 2 penalties. And I remember them being quite quick. I'm going to say, because I remember the West Ham game a little bit. I don't remember the Brighton game at all. So I'm going to say Gillingham.
Correct.
Is it?
Bang on, yeah, bang on the money.
28 minutes.
Yeah, I don't remember the other goal though. I remember it was 2 penalties. I can't remember the other goal for the life of me. But...
So Brighton you scored your third goal in the 90th minute. West Ham 57 minutes, and Gillingham first half hat trick in under half an hour. 28 minutes. Have you got any of the balls?
Somewhere probably. I don't know. I moved house so many times. They probably got lost somewhere. I don't know where. The kids probably kicked them around in the back garden. Yeah, but yeah, Gillingham. I remember that game. West Ham. I don't remember the Brighton game at all. West Ham doesn't count, does it? Anyone can score against West Ham.
I remember you scored twice against Spurs when you played for Reading, actually, because I'm a season ago older at Spurs, so I've actually watched you a few times, Dave.
Yeah, we played that game 6-4.
Mm.
It was, I think Berbatov had a couple of goals, I had a couple of goals, and they were both desperately trying to get a hat trick. And obviously, then he decided to sort of shift gears, and I think he scored 4 again. And I remember being interviewed afterwards, and the guy, I think it was Tim Deller at BBC Barks down here, said, Dave, how do you sum up that game? And I just said, look, it was one of those freak games. It will never, ever happen again. Don't pay any mind to it. You know, we win as a team, lose all the usual rubbish. And, let's just leave it there. Freak game, one-off, never happening again. Played Portsmouth a few weeks later and lost 7-4. Which I think is still the highest scoring Premier League game of all time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
That was the classic Chris Kamara game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And there's been a red card.
Yeah. I don't know, is there? Brilliant. Yeah, and I just remember Tim Deller trying to approach me after that game saying, Dave, I said, you get that microphone out.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much for coming on, Dave.
No, not at all. Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it. And before we go, I'd like to say happy birthday for Sunday. Is it coming up?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, oh God, it's the 18th. Yeah. So, yeah. God, Sunday.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one day of the year that Dave Kitson gets celebrated.
That's depressing. Yeah, someone sent me a thing the other day saying it was on this day Dave Kitson signed for Reading 20 years ago. I just
That one away.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it and enjoyed all your stories. And yeah, really great to hear from you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Right, so we'll wrap that up. I hope all the listeners enjoyed that one as much as we did. And we'll see you next time for the next episode of Talking Loyal. Take care.
Cheers.